Hello there. I'm your moderator, Sage Goodwin, and as always, I'm joined by the automation wizard, Samit. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Sage. I was just telling Ron a second ago that I'm not exactly sure what time zone I'm on. So, be prepared to play the world's tiniest violin for me here. But I spent I spent a big chunk of August with the family in Greece,
Mm,
which was amazing, right? Just visiting with family, kind of getting truly a chance to unplug, which was fantastic. The only caveat to that is I landed back in Chicago only to never leave O'Hare, get right back on a plane, and go to VMware Explore. But
It's VMworld.
from yeah,
it's
Ron
VMware.
knows.
Yeah, even
It,
Remo knows it's VMware world. We're not doing that here.
and back on the plane for an amazingly exhilarating week with all the usual suspects, the key vendors. But for one of the best reasons for me to come back a little bit early was just seeing apps on demand and the concept of applications become highlighted as a central theme and
Hmm.
strategy that even Samit Dewan is talking about. Shankar's talking about it. You've got Arindram and Jeff and the whole team really kind of getting behind just the concept of apps being central to workspace delivery, which, Ron, as you know, you and I have lived that world from your days, doing app layering. And, it's just finally, it seems like something clicked in 2022
On
when
the
they
VMware
started putting
side,
this
for
together.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Especially when you look at what happened with, if we just think about app volumes for a few
Hmm.
years, right?
Yeah.
If you guys remember, it was at app volumes 2x forever.
All right.
Like 5 years. It just sat. And really what happened was they started to do some stuff for the next version. And if you remember back then, there was a release that they then pulled back
Yeah.
and it went dark for years. Well, it went dark and they were updating it and stuff. And I came in just when they were actually turning a corner on that. And the app volumes team had just spent all this time. They literally did this. It was something that people beg software companies, especially big software companies, to do, but they never do. They're like,
Right.
all right, every version of this, you're releasing some features and you release these features, but we've still got these kind of core complaints with your base product, right? Like
Yeah.
with app volumes, one of the great ones was, well, you don't really have app volumes. What you have is a volume that we put a bunch of apps in. We call it an app stack. And then
Yeah.
you put a few of these together. And they were working around some limitations around performance, like how fast does the disconnect? How does it read in the registry? And if you
Right.
had too many disks, it would take too long. Or if I had too many layers and the priorities weren't right, apps didn't work. Well, they actually went back and said, hey, let's address all these things.
Yeah.
And they literally shut down and said, nope, every app in its own virtual disk. We're going to figure out how to do separation. We're going to figure out how to do registry prioritization. We're going to figure out how to blend it. Oh, wait a minute. We hit the login experience too much. Well, that's because we're doing it all at login. Why don't we allow, some flexibility there? And they started adding apps on demand, and
Let's do it at
which,
launch. Yeah.
yeah, which apps on demand is delivering like a partial, right? Like the file associations and the registry entries and stuff like, but doesn't actually attach the disk until they want to use it. So yeah, it became a big thing at VMware, which I give them kudos, man. If you've been around Citrix forever, you guys know it's always been apps, 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 apps anywhere, apps on demand, apps what you want,
Right.
whatever. But I'll give it to VMware. They gave Jeff a lot of time to do a lot of stuff with app volumes, and he took those couple of years and really built a nice, cool Windows app deployment platform.
For sure. And Ron, I mean, we went right into it, but for those folks that don't necessarily know why you have this level of expertise around
Who
app
who is this
balls
Ron
and
Oglesby
Who
and
the hell
guy?
is this
and
guy?
and why he knows what's happening behind the curtains at VMware for those couple of years when they actually pulled it off the shelf. It'd be great to just get a quick intro for those that may, for whatever reason, not know who you are. Just a little bit about you, Ron, and kind of where you come from, because I was probably most excited, one of the most excited I've been for this particular podcast, because along with you, Jeff, even like Tim Mangan and a couple others, there's only a few app nerds like us like left.
There's not a lot of app nerds.
Yeah. Those guys, those guys and girls have just kind of gone on to bigger and better things, maybe, whether it's workspace delivery, identity management, and things like that. But it'd be great for the audience to get a little bit of a sense of why you know so much about
Why
apps.
do I know anything? Yeah. So I've been in EUC and I figured this out the other day, and I almost didn't believe it. It's been 25 years now in EUC. I started in 99 picking up the phone, being a support tech. And within 3 months, somehow I got on the Citrix team because I figured out how to make printers work in WinFrame.
Oh,
and now
nice.
I was the Citrix guy because I could make printers work. And that moved on, consulting, doing Citrix consulting for years, and then ESX consulting for years, right? I wrote the first ESX book with Scott Harold, and eventually I moved over to the software side. Like you had mentioned, I got recruited to Unidesk which is now Citrix App Layering, to be their field CTO and run their pre-sales. Went to Citrix for 3 years after they acquired us, and I was the director of advanced technology there, which is a fucking made-up title, right? Really, to be honest.
It sounds like anything that was not part of the core stack kind of fell directly into your lap.
Yeah, and they didn't know, like, how acquisitions go, right?
Oh, yeah.
First off, they make 2 lines. Everyone we're going to keep and everyone we're going to fire. That's just what happens. And out of everyone they're going to keep, they go, okay, where do they wind in both our pay stack and what groups do they wind up in? And then they farm them out. And with me, they didn't know to put all right, are we going to have him over here in consulting? Is he going to go to pre-sales, or is he going to product, or is he going to marketing?
Yeah.
And everyone went, we don't know. So they gave me a title. They had no idea, well, we don't know what we'll do with them. And eventually I helped with you spend a year and a half doing integration work, right? How do we sell this at Citrix? How do we integrate it with our product? And then eventually I moved over, funny enough, and I did 2 things for like my last year and a half. I ran all the CUGC stuff and the CTP programs, all the community programs at Citrix. Yeah. And they drugged me into that because they were like, you were one of the original CTPs. Go over here and make this better. Go do this, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, that's great. I love them all. Let's go figure it out. But the other side was performance analytics when Citrix introduced that, and I helped on performance analytics for about a year. And you were mentioning VMware. They were trying to make me a product marketing manager, senior director. I couldn't do that. So I left and I went to VMware, and I wound up in the CTO's office at VMware for 3 years. For EUC, helping out Jeff on the app side. Don't get me wrong, Jeff didn't need any help from an architecture and all that, right? He knew what he was doing. I helped from messaging and trying to put the word out and asking goofy questions like, is that a good idea? Maybe we shouldn't do that. But worked with Jeff a lot and just did great stuff, and left after that, left VMware, couldn't take the big company anymore, and went back to the startup world, went back to Login VSI.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, and Login VSI, it's funny to think of it as a startup because
it's so weird. Yeah.
It's been there for ages, run by, the Dutch, and, it's always been great technology. I think, one of the challenges, and it's one that we face even at Rimo as we're establishing our identity, is, well, what exactly are you guys when you grow up, right? And I think so hard. with someone like John Vigent and you and Michael coming on board and kind of taking on some of the leadership roles, for me especially, because like at the beginning of Rimo3's journey, Login VSI was kind of seen incorrectly to an extent as a competitor, right? But over the last, like, I don't know, we'll call it 6 months, there's really been a transition in the identity, and I'm sure you've been playing a big role in it, but in the identity where you're focusing on really three things, right? And it's all post-deployment. There's cost optimization. There's the ability to ensure that you're doing performance analytics post-deployment, the fact that you're doing, so it's not about like the synthetic user load testing. It's not necessarily about what it used to be. I want to be everything to everybody around a VDI deployment. But you guys are now focusing on something so much more impactful because it's narrower. And believe it or not, that's really a tough thing to do, especially as a startup when you're just trying to get and land as many customers as possible. But I think that's been, I'd be interested to get your perspective. But I think for me, from an external lens looking in at this, I'm like, well, now working with John and working with Ron and working with Michael and the team, it's been very clear what our kind of synergy looks like. And for customers, it's got to be a lot easier because
is there some overlap? Yeah, there's some overlap, a little bit, right? There's, I hate to say it, I could take any product on the market that's an EUC. Man, where is ThinPrint? I will get ThinPrint and I will find overlap with them.
Yeah.
But with our cases, right? We have our synthetic user, which most people don't even know the term synthetic user, right? They know Login VSI does load tests, and they know even today, you see a white paper. That paper just came out from Citrix where they were comparing AVD machine types, GPU versus non. They're all in there. Login VSI, knowledge worker workload, all this stuff. And I used Login VSI way back in the day, right? I was that guy.
Yeah.
And what people remember was I have a DL360 and a DL580. I'm going to load test these and see where my cost comes out better. And that's what they did. And I think it's like a reboot, right? Because imagine, and I say this with love, right? And we're going to be a podcast and we said we're not going to filter anything.
Yeah.
I say this with love, like EJ, right? One of the original founders is still at Login, right? And him and I talk a couple times a week and all that. They were engineers that built a tool out of necessity. Then they started selling it and they were like, wow, people really like this. So they made a little company about that product, right? It was tiny. It was just a bunch of engineers. And then the business started growing. And like all businesses, things have to change, right?
Yeah.
Like if you start a company and you've got an oil change company, like it's like your own version of a quick lube.
Yeah.
You might have the most successful quick lube in your town. Now you try to build 7 more. The person who runs at scale and finds different customers and different markets and different ways to attract customers and different services is different than that person who knew how to run it really there, right? They've got the original dream. They've got the expertise. How do you expand it? And I think that's what's happening with Logon right now is they've done this reboot, for lack of a better technical term. And they said, okay, wait a minute. We aren't a performance and capacity planning company.
Yeah.
Right? We're a synthetic user and load generation company that collects performance and application data.
Mm-hmm.
What do I care if the target's VDI? What do I care if it's a laptop? What do I care if it's GPU versus non-GPU? Wait a minute, we can generate load? Why can't I run load in a cloud environment and have it individually check all my gateways and make sure they're up? Yep. Why can't I have a user log in and check every application? Is it all up? Am I connecting? Whatever. And all of a sudden that's changed the model. But we have the problem you just said. Everybody has 10 years of capacity planning and scalability testing.
100%.
We still do it, but yeah. So we've got all the problems of a startup with customer names like BMW and JP Morgan, right? It's the weirdest. It's the weirdest thing. Yeah.
So and what's interesting is like when you think about this, so Sage, for just some context, right? It is a decade old. It's more than that, right? And it came out
the original company. 12 years.
And it came out of a consulting practice where they found a need for some technology just to make themselves more efficient, to Ron's point about being able to scale across different types of environments, being able to scale in different geos and look at different use cases. While they were the king of the quick lube for the Netherlands for a particular capacity planning for VDI at the time. Now they've turned into so much more. So like this evolution that we're starting to see is a really exciting time to join a startup, right? Like, so, when I start thinking about what you're saying, Ron, around, having this, it's almost like getting not the worst of both worlds. It's not a fair way to put it.
No.
What you're getting is you're getting a great customer base, but with a great customer base comes demands and debt. When you're trying to reinvent yourself or streamline your messaging and offerings for net new things that are happening because a market is coming that these guys aren't ready for, it becomes a very delicate balancing act, right? How much do you spend on innovation of the new stuff versus supporting some of the older?
Like, we've kind of since we came in, we've started our customer advisory boards, like bringing in the customers and going, we're going to show you the roadmap and then we'll let you gripe.
Yeah.
And the difference now is they get to see the roadmap. Customers get to see, okay, here's what we're doing. And then they griped.
Yeah.
Right. And human nature is to turn away from something you don't like to hear. Right. If you're standing in front of a small Bunsen burner and somebody turns it up real quick, even though it'll never touch you, you immediately turn away. We just do that. It's a visceral monkey brain reaction to turn away from stuff we don't like. But, it's the customer is telling you what you're doing wrong. Yes. Are people wrong sometimes? Yeah. Sure, right. Some customer could tell you the way you do this is completely wrong and draw it all out, and it could be wrong. Mm-hmm. But damn it, you better listen, because there's times that those customers are dead on right. Hey, we've been asking about this for 2 years. Oh, hey, have you guys thought about this technology yet and introducing it over here? No, we haven't. Don't be visceral. Don't have that reaction of, well, no, we know how to do it better over here. Well, wait a minute. Is that a better way? And I think that what we're starting to see now is, and I hate to say this, there's a difference between an engineer's reaction and a counselor, a human social counselor reacting to bad news. Engineers, they've stared at their code, they've coded it, they've been through all the architectural meetings. What do you mean I'm wrong? Right? Yeah. Versus a counselor, when they first say something, we first say, well, I think that this is wrong. And they go, why do you think it's wrong? We're trying to introduce that. Wait a minute, why? Mm-hmm. Tell us why. And so it's interesting. It's it's fun. I don't know what else to say. Fixing that problem is fun.
And I love that, right? Like I'm going to take that from you, Ron, and I'm going to claim it as my own. But for those that listen to the podcast, they'll already know. Just like Sage and I have stolen historical inertia from our podcast.
I have used that in the last week.
Ooh. People just doing the same thing the same way because they've always done it that way, right? But this is a perfect example of it. Like a counselor-led mindset to understanding bad news, right? Because it might not be bad news. It might just be a way for you to start kind of discerning and look, because you're absolutely right. And it's not because people are being contentious or being protective of their IP or what they've built. It's because it's kind of, to an extent, they haven't seen it in the wild. They haven't seen it built into someone's workflow where they're starting to see, boy, it'd be way easier if I didn't have to click 17 times, right? And it's something I could just snap in, right? And I think that, and I don't know if you guys are doing this at Login, but like one of the things that I have going on here at Rimo is I'm not a CTO by nature, right? Like that happens to be my role. But my whole life has been really focused on either A, being an engineer, or B, being a pre-sales customer advocate. And engineering just happens to be my background, and it happens to be something that I know how to do. So for me, as we've built out the Rimo3 engineering team, it's been with a pre-sales and product management focus to say, my architect needs to be on my top calls with my advisory boards.
That's so interesting. I mean, I one of the things I learned from Unidesk, and it was really from the old CEO at Unidesk, Don Bulens, he was like, he drilled it into us over and over. Customer satisfaction is the only thing that matters.
Yeah.
And we'd be like, no, sales matter. He goes, sales are a function of customer satisfaction. And he beat us up on it over and over and over again. But to the point of where we used to invite customers into some of our backlog prioritization meetings. Imagine take a customer, and not even your biggest customer. Take your customer that uses all the functions in your app diligently. And they might not be your biggest, but they're always in it. They might even be young. They might have a more junior IT staff that could have solved a couple of problems if they knew a little bit more about PowerShell or something. They might have those types of support calls. But those diligent customers, you bring them in and you say, look, we've got 10 stories. All of them are customer requests.
Yeah.
How do we prioritize? Your customers, even though you're only pulling in that one, right? And the big mistake big guys make is something else. But even though you're only pulling in that one and you're letting them prioritize, and in the back of your head, you're going, well, this other customer also had this one pretty high, and you're doing that.
Yeah.
Once you're adjusting for the customer, they'll all remember it, right? And the impact they have, we had Citrix show up before our acquisition it was VMworld or it was Synergy, I don't remember, but they stopped by our booth and they just started talking to some people, right? Some senior folks in Citrix product. And within minutes, like I was not at the booth, within minutes, I come back and I realize that like there's, one of the VPs from Citrix product talking to my customer, right? One of my Ohio County customers. And I walk over and I'm like, everything good? And they're like, he's like, oh, I'm just talking to your guy here. I'm like, oh no, this is whatever county, they're one of our customers. And he goes, wait a minute, you've been showing me a demo. He goes, oh, that's my environment back at the office. He's got his iPad up. This customer was pitching Citrix on our stuff. We didn't pay for him. We didn't.
Yeah.
Customer success, customer happiness. That's all they care about, right? They will go to the wall for you. They will show up at your booths for you. And if to me as a product person, to see someone care that much about something you helped build, oh shit, I'll do that all day.
Anytime.
It's awesome, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing that you really want, is to have that level of interest and use where they understand and they know your product. It's great if you have like the big logo on there and you have the big customer, but if they don't if they only use one feature, they're going to provide the feedback that you need.
Like how many of us, and Samit, you've been an engineer and we're all in IT. How many of us have ever worked on a product that was a worldwide phenomenon? If you were the person who designed the shape of the button on the first iPhone, that's all you did, big company, right?
Mm-hmm.
When that iPhone released and they were waiting in lines outside, you were sitting there going, God damn, we really did it.
Yeah.
Look at these. They love it, right? We don't get that opportunity for like in the consumer space, right? We're business to business stuff. So those are our people, right? That person that's willing to stand there with their iPad and show you your product. That's just like that guy who worked on an iPhone or on a watch or whatever, and a Ring doorbell. And now you're driving. Imagine if you were a Ring guy in your first couple of years and you're driving through your neighborhood and you see on a person's house you don't know the first Ring doorbell in your neighborhood. You're like, it's here. Yes, and that's that feeling, right? That's the feeling you get in startups that you almost never get in the big guys.
And that's exactly where I was going to go with that, Ron, right? Like, I mean, we've both been very fortunate, you with app layering and so much more so than that, right? Like with Unidesk, but app layering was a phenomenon at the time as well. And then whatever happens after with Citrix is, same thing with AppDNA, right? It was a phenomenon at the time, but having that loyal customer base, it gives you energy. Yes. Is it really, really difficult to work on a shoestring budget with a small team of engineers to try to incorporate the feedback of a BMW? Heck yeah, that's difficult. That's massively difficult. But then to your point, getting people out there at the shows talking about, have you checked out Rimo3? Have you checked out Login VSI? Wearing your frickin' t-shirts, right? Sage,
Yeah.
these are sick, by the way. Like,
For sure.
It's awesome.
The automate all the things. We saw several people that I'd never ever seen before, but this gave me that Ring doorbell feeling, right? Where like I saw a guy wearing this shirt, and then I saw like 6 more, and I'm like, this is amazing. And one of the things that someone had said is, I think what it is not only the colors and the message, right? Because automate all the things is like automate discovery, automate import. So it's tech nerd stuff, but it was more like the look of it felt like different strokes, or it's like the 70s bubble letters. Where
I'd kick it a little I'd say early 80s, man. That's 81, 82.
Yeah. So, but to your point, Ron, like now, when you're in the startup, and it's great, because Jeff will give you, like Ulatoski will give you a completely different view, because for the first time, like you should have seen the pride. And if you look at his LinkedIn feed right now, him getting his makeup done and getting on the big keynote stage, which of course I have to take a shot at because we're good buddies, but he's like, this is the first time that something that we've been working on for 5 years.
Jeff's had it. Yeah. This is his thing. This is his moment, man. And Jeff's a good guy. I'll throw this out. It's really funny. So when I was at Unidesk, and all the people in the EUC world who talk to speakers, and I've been at all of the events, I've spoken, I know all the, people start naming people in EUC that speak or write books, and I'm like, oh yeah, we know each other. Oh yeah, it's a small world.
Yeah.
Back when I was at Unidesk, the last Bri-Forum was going on, and I wanted to do a presentation because, like you said, app layering was all of a sudden everywhere, right?
Oh, yeah.
Different people tried it, right? Citrix tried it with the Ring Cube technology. They called it Project Acorn or something. The Atlantis folks who were doing storage I/O optimization tried it with, they called it FLOX, file level block allocation or something. We were doing it, and then eventually FS Logics, Cloud Volumes, which became App Volumes, Liquidware even did something along these lines. I was like, you know what? It's too effing confusing. And thinking of Bri-Forum, I said, you know what I'll do? I'll do a session where I do a primer on file system virtualization, like via file system filters and registry merges. And then I'll go just product by product and say what they do and how they're different from all the others. So VMware did disk attach different than we did. They waited for an unannounced volume just to show up. They had a service that looked for it. And when it showed up, they would look in directories on it, grab the registry, they'd start doing stuff. We mounted them at the time pre-boot. Somebody else mounted them at logon. And so VMware, I call up and I started calling. I was just like, I'm just going to start calling freaking product managers. Someone's going to pick up the phone, emailing people. Jeff talked to me for a little bit. We were competitors, and I'm not going to say his name. He was at Microsoft for a while. I think he just left. But at the time, I finally got a hold of a guy, and I said, look, I want to answer these like 8 questions. Everybody is getting the same 8 questions. I'm not going to, he's like, look, everyone here tells me not to talk to you. He's like, but I talk to people who know you and they say you're not going to be bad about this. And so I'm going to be in your presentation. You better not F me. And I'm like, all right. So he gives me the answers. I swear to God, I go to present that. The dude's sitting in the front row like this, just waiting, right? Like afterwards, his first name was Dennis, which means you could probably look up who it was. But him and Jeff gave me info. And even when I first got to VMware, Jeff was a little hands off, right? I was the Unidesk guy, the Citrix app layering guy. But within a couple of times of me I'm like, no, tell me what you're doing.
Yeah.
I can help, right? I know the market. I can help. And once he realized I wasn't trying to come in and tell him what he was doing wrong, I was like really happy that they had all this success. Man, Jeff lit up. We took him to the EUC Masters Retreat. We were the only team to bring a PM, and I just turned him loose among the EUC Masters Retreat. right? It's like bringing a puppy into a hound of wolves, right? He was just all wide-eyed. He's like, tell me more, you know? I'd walk into random rooms there and I'd see him sitting down with 5 people going, wait a minute. So you don't want to update an app like that. How do you, you know, and he was getting all this feedback. It's his moment, man. I hope he digs it. I hope he digs it.
He is. And that's funny because it's a good segue for us, Ron, because, you know, we've talked about the small startup and making the impact and putting your stamp, and just having that sense of pride, right? Being able to say, listen, you know, I contributed. It's not that I built it, right? Even at AppDNA, I didn't build AppDNA, but I was a big part of ensuring that it was successful and getting customers excited and on board. Same with you at Unidesk, right? And I think when we go to the larger companies, let's, you know, we can talk about the other piece, which I really enjoyed you just saying, hey, listen, after you get acquired, this is what happens. You're either on this side of the line or not. They don't know what you do because they don't expect people to wear so many different hats. And then the integration typically goes poorly, which was the case for app streaming and then also for AppDNA, right? Both are kind of end of life, but although Dan Lazard is now owning app streaming and they're trying to bring
I didn't know that. That's cool.
That's
cool.
They're trying to resuscitate it now, because apps on demand is just such a good idea for attacking a white space of non-installed VMware bases, right? So like if all of a sudden you're moving to AVD, they don't care if you're using App Volumes or you're using Azure Resource Manager or Nerdio. Just support App Vols and we'll get it out there, right? So, you know, with all that being said, you know, what were some of the highlights for you of being able to make an impact? We talked about Jeff, and, you know, maybe I should do another podcast with Jeff. He's been asking too.
He has been. We need to have him on there again.
And we went out to dinner, and he's just such a genuinely good dude.
He's a great dude, yeah.
But from your perspective, you know, when you were thinking after VMware, 3 years in the Octo, working with some of the best minds, like I love Sean, I love Gabe, I love you, I love you know, all the guys and Brian even, you know, from, you know, that came out slightly different.
That's okay.
It's slightly wrong.
I would even say I love Brian even.
But when you start thinking about kind of like that powerhouse of brain power working on innovation inside of an EUC company, did you feel that you were able to maximize the output of that? Like, because the good thing about it is, heck yeah, look, I've just got 5 big brains in one room. Now let's let it loose on the rest of the world and solve these problems that they've been talking about for the last 20 years.
It's you know, because of the big company nature of it, there's ups and downs, right? There's things that you know is going to be a good idea, but timing, budgets, all these things that we hear so much in the startup world that we just try to overcome, that really become roadblocks a lot of times in big companies. They don't have to innovate around the lack of cash, so they don't. True. Right? Mm-hmm. That happens sometimes. Helping Jeff with the messaging and being out, you know, doing stuff in public about the app stuff was great. When I first walked in, this is an inside thing that was really funny. Brian had been working for months on an internal white paper. He had done all these interviews, and it was just for internal use, and I'm not going to give away any company secrets or anything, but imagine interviewing 30 or 40 PMs on like the AirWatch side, the Horizon side, senior directors, a VP, some engineers. Then he goes, I'm going to go out to the field sales teams and I'm going to interview them and see what they think about the product, the faults, the integration, whatever they happen to say. That's what he would just let them spew forth and take notes, hundreds of pages of notes. And he goes, there's all these conclusions in here on things that we can do better. I want to submit it to the execs as part of coming out of Octo. And I'm like, well, you can't tell them that they've got 238 things wrong, right? That's not how Brian is a great guy, and you're right. He's a really, really smart dude. He lived a long time, that analyst and news kind of life.
Exactly.
So to him, he was gathering information to write how he knew to write all of his info in a big, long article, some type of timeline. And I said, look, we got to pick 5 things. 5 things that recur all through here, prioritize them, give them back to the execs like that. We spent weeks writing this paper. We got 5 things. We called 5 people's babies ugly.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of it was around integration, where we were like, we can't keep having mobile over here. They're talking about Windows 10 management, and over here, Horizon and everything else, and they're not communicating. They're not sharing code bases. They're not on the same platform. And then a bunch of other things. They said, thank you very much. Have a nice life. You know, send us out the door. We secretly, from other VPs or, you know, senior directors, were getting direct messages. Oh, number 4 is a great idea. Number 2 is, you know, things like, but no one stepped up in the meeting to go,
Oh, no way.
hey, whatever. Within 6 months, they had implemented 3 out of the 5 changes.
It worked.
You know, we went in and we presented this. I made a naive thing. I made a naive judgment going into VMware. When I taught guys pre-sales, when we were in small companies, I'm like, look, you have to have empathy with the customer. What are they trying to accomplish? And then when you understand what they're trying to accomplish, I don't care if it's your idea or not.
Yeah.
Right. I would rather tell the customer, here's what we do, here's what our product can do for you, and have it be their idea. Right. Oh, let's go out. Well, wait a minute. I can use your product to do this. Yes, you can. Mm-hmm. Great. I'll enable you. What do you want? And it goes back to that old line. If you don't care who gets credit, you can make a lot of change. Mm-hmm. And I forgot that. Right. We put this white paper up, right? We presented it. We answered questions. We went in and said, here are our 5 ideas. We did not go in and find an exec or 2 on a couple of those ideas and make it their idea.
Right.
Let them champion it, let them drive it. So we were just saying people's babies were ugly. It was cool to make the change, but in a startup, you still have to think about people, but not like that, you know?
Yeah.
Like we were having a problem with one of our programs. It wasn't even a direct report of mine. We're like, okay, how are we going to get this thing back online? I looked at John, the CEO, and I go, I'll take it. I'm just going to go over there in a program I have nothing to do with, and I'm going to work with this guy until we figure it out. Right. You can't do that in a big company. Right. It's like I get instant satisfaction out of the first meeting. Okay, we had a path. We're moving. At VMware, I might have to have a meeting before I have the meeting to schedule the next meeting to get on that guy's calendar.
It's funny then. So like as you were deciding to depart VMware, right? I'm sure you had options, and I went through a similar exercise, by the way, which is an interesting one. I'm happy to share the story or possibly tell it some other time. But I did sit down with a dear friend of mine, and she's a bit of a mentor for me. And so she's the chief people officer over at Flexera. Elle Lagis. She hired me for my first job in EUC. I owe her a massive debt, and we still stay in touch. She's absolutely brilliant. And I was thinking after I left Citrix that I was going to go join a large company and run worldwide global pre-sales, which is a passion of mine. That's what I do. That's what I love to do, right? And she made me kind of go through this exercise, and she's like, 3 words. She's like, go off for a week and think about it, but give me 3 words that you can have, that you need to have in your next role. And she's like, and then use yourself as a checks and balances, right? Like, great, you want to run a company? That's fine. Do you have the capability to do that today? Right? Are you in a position where you can do something like that? So it was a really interesting exercise because I did have an offer to run a pre-sales organization of over 500 people globally. And I had every intent to accept that offer. It's great money. So I wrote down my 3 things, and it was a global team. It was upside was the second one. So the first word was global. The second one was upside, both personal and professional, right? And my third word was impact, right? I had to be able to make an impact. Where at Citrix,
that's great.
Yes, I had a big team, but ultimately I wasn't able to make the impact at the pace or at a rate that was relevant. So like this took me 7 days. I had a list of about 55 words, and I finally was able to narrow it down to 3. And she's like, your current role only affords you 2 out of those 3 things. It's a global role and you get the upside. But if you go and do your own thing, and you go back to that small startup world with Mike Welling and start this company, you would theoretically get all 3 things. And that, believe it or not, it wasn't, is the market ready, is because the product at that point is almost irrelevant. Between you and I, we have enough knowledge to solve 50,000 EUC problems, right? We know where the bodies are buried here. But it was that exercise for me that helped me determine that at that point in time in my life, the startup was going to be much more fulfilling. 4 years later, I could tell you a different story about the remotional roller coaster that I'm on a monthly basis. We've termed that as a thing, by the way, a remotional roller coaster.
Yep.
But what was your experience? And what did you go through after you were leaving VMware?
You were having, you were having, I love that 3-word thing. I actually wrote that down. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah, for sure.
At VMware, I wanted to have more of a direct impact, right? I mean, and some of this might have been my own fault, right? Maybe I didn't understand how to play VMware internal baseball very well, right? Could have been I came in, dude, I came into VMware in like April of 2020. I was doing all my onboarding remote. When I was talking about getting hired, I was going to be back on the road. I was going to be in Asia and Europe and everywhere and doing customer stuff with VMware EUC customers worldwide. And that turned into video conferences, which, instead of turning into sales and architecture and long-term vision, it was very quickly, hey, can you help us get 10,000 more seats in Azure in the next 16 days, right? Things like that. And when I was looking to, when it was getting near the end, and I could have been one of those folks that are still at VMware, I could have sat around and waited for a severance package and all that. But I was like, man, I need to have fun. I need to go where there's more danger. VMware pays, anybody that knows, VMware pays really well, right? These big companies, it isn't like they're cheap. They're not hurting. If they're big, they've got stock for people and RSUs and great healthcare plans. And I was expensing, my cell phone, my internet connection. VMware had this thing, you could expense your gym membership during COVID, right? So, but I wasn't feeling the danger. I wasn't, I hate to say it. I like on the last Friday of the month to check my phone, knowing we're, 100,000 short. Yeah. All right. Who are the guys on the West Coast going to close this thing? Do they need me to make a call? Right? What's wrong with it? Oh, is there a technical? Is it some issue? They won't sign the PO until that's fixed. I'll call up the tech. I'll make sure it gets done, whatever it is. And for me, like I've always believed, we're not selling to companies, we're selling to people. And I want to be around those people. I was just too far disconnected at VMware.
That's such a fair sentiment that you were able to pick that up, right? Like it takes a lot of self-reflecting to give up all those things. They might seem like small things, right? Like, the gym membership coverage, but like, it's a lot. Golden handcuffs are a very real thing for people that know what they're doing. And
I knew senior pre-sales engineers, senior guys that have been there 10, 12 years, and they're rock stars, right? Yeah. Rock stars. Guys who are dealing with pre-sales on millions of dollars of horizon every month. Those guys are sitting on sometimes a couple $100,000 a year in RSUs, vesting. That's hard to leave for people, right? I mean,
it's a college tuition. Yeah, it's a college tuition, and let's say college tuition or whatever.
Let's say you're 45, you got a couple of kids in their teens, and you're like, man, I'd really love to go back to a startup, but if I do 3 more years here, I've got 100 a year that's vesting. That's 65 after taxes. I've got my kid's college paid if I put it away.
Yeah. It's a
You know,
tough
I
thing.
was lucky. My kid graduated, and 6 months later, I was out the door. So,
Great timing.
yeah, great timing. Great timing.
I do want to go back to something that you said earlier of how the differences between big companies, small companies, and all of these the different scales, and how it seems like, especially after VMware Explore and or VMworld, getting into all of the excitement around these things, it seems like this is the time to get into automation and application. I want to go around the room here and see, why do you think it is that right now you have big companies, you have companies that have been around a while, you have startups, you have Rimo3, like Login VSI. Why is it now that we're getting into all of this? Ron, we'll start off with you.
You want me to start? Okay. Well, and you had mentioned it earlier a little bit. You had talked about how things are becoming more essentially application centric, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it made me think. I've had this little process spinning in the back of my head, thinking on this for a little bit. And I think some of it is the evolution of the platforms that we're all kind of working on and sitting on. And what I mean by that is, if we rewind 20 years, and we look at this over a 20-year time frame, server-based computing, VDI, all those things, the big third-party players back at the beginning were things like printing, right? I think I messed with thin print earlier. And there was like 5 other major printing companies that did everything from, we're just going to make all your printers IP based in your Citrix environment, and no one will have auto connected printers, and that's how that'll work. Some of them were just universal print driver type of software that, based on what your client was connecting, they would try to substitute in the right drivers. We used to do it manually, right? With what were they called? The NT print or print.inf files or whatever they were.
You'd have to list them all in the notepad doc. Yeah.
All the equals. Yeah. This equals that. Everything was HP LaserJet. But that's all started to evolve. And now it's evolved to the point where cloud is taking care of my infrastructure. Now my SEs I hire, they don't have to understand racking and stacking, cable management. They're not neck deep in, Cisco switches and going, well, wait a minute, I didn't check with them they don't know anything about that. It's gotten up to software people are different than the hardware people, which it used to not be. It was all combined. And now as you move up that stack, we've solved the printing problems. Nobody's talking about protocol wars anymore. There's no more, now it's all the way up to GPU or not GPU. And we're really looking at the apps themselves, right? People are starting to get to the real question. And that's why I think things have drifted application centric. I think we've solved a lot of the other things, and we've become, more software focused, especially our customers, where they don't have to deal with hardware as much. A lot of EUC customers will argue with me and say, I'm still dealing with hardware. I'm like, I know, but you can even see this abstraction happening. And when you get into applications, then you deal with real complexity, whether it's within the applications themselves, how they were written, how they communicate with other apps, what they're doing with the operating system, and then all the things that you're doing to your image. Our environments, right? Banks have gotten bigger, financial services, the healthcare systems. I've had customers that, I worked on them when they were big and they had 20,000 Citrix users, and now they're 85 or 100,000 because they're consolidating and consolidating. When you do that, specialties continue to rise from that scale.
Yeah.
And that is printing solved. This is solved. All these things are solved. Now we can deal with applications. It used to just be in Citrix, oh, you can't launch Word? Why don't you log off and log back on, and then we'll check it after that, right? Now they're not doing that. Now they're saying, I want to know before it even happens if we have a server where Word isn't launching on, or ArcGIS or whatever app we're running. And that's why I think applications have become more important. Things have consolidated. There's more of them, and it's specialties have risen. And now EUC folks, they're becoming more application. And I know, Samit, that you said you remember Tim Mangan, and Tim was the original guy that wrote like the sequencer for Softricity before it became AppV, right? And we did all the Softricity stuff with Tim. I think you're right that a lot of the application specialists from back then have floated out, but the group that's left behind needs automation, and they're being asked about applications because they're now being compared to SaaS apps.
Yep.
Right. They've got this type of availability. It's this type of performance. What are you showing me when you're with your little Windows app?
Yep.
I don't know. I'm a View guy or I'm a Citrix guy. It's not enough of an answer anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've hit all the major points that I would have also hit, which sounds like we've got the same type of background, right? I mean, honestly, to Ron's point, what used to be infrastructure and workspace delivery, it used to be a complex thing, right? Citrix brought a lot of value around how to best deliver that and minimize some of it. But man, talking to like Scott Manchester over at Microsoft, what he's done with Windows 365 and truly removed any infrastructure overhead for a user, any workspace delivery overhead for a user. Those things have been completely commoditized. The only thing he can't commoditize is getting applications to that Windows
your apps,
365, your versions of your apps that you need to do your job. They've been customized. They've been homegrown. They've been perfect example, Ron. Yeah, good clarification, right? COTS applications, sure, you can get those to work, but your apps as an enterprise IT organization are still your bearing of that has all of the complexity. And for us, being able to remove a huge chunk of that complexity. I mean, I always call it automate the mundane, right? Like it's boring. A lot of it is boring work. And if you can have a machine do the majority of it, your limited resources and talent is focused only on the problem children. That is a huge value in itself. And then you decouple that portion, which is just the migration and application delivery, and then focus on the change impact analysis is kind of what I'm calling it. The rate of change for AVD infrastructure updates, it's 1,200 a year, right? You've got 3 new feature releases of Windows theoretically potentially coming out every year, 12 cumulative updates. You've got 12 different change requests that are going to come in and for hardening, security, changing your surface area. All these changes will impact your environmental workspace and the application performance and the application delivery to that particular workspace. And if you're not automating the understanding of the impact of that change prior to deploying it, you are setting yourself up for a real bad hurting the next day, right? Like that. It's as simple as the fact that a lot of the old complexity has been completely commoditized with the workspace and the infrastructure. B, you're now going to deal with a volume of change like nothing we've ever seen before, ever, in terms of how often that workspace is being updated. And then C, you would never be able to keep up with it unless you somehow automate the impact analysis that comes with it, which is where kind of our partnership on the pre-deployment side, your partnership on the post-deployment side and the optimization side, it just makes sense, right? So you're starting to see tooling kind of come out that is forcing people to understand that they need to be much more app-centric in the view of what their digital transformation strategy looks like. That was never the case.
And it's not just customers seeing this, right? There's I was, and I'm not going to say, I was at one of the big healthcare software companies, and they host their app for people who can't host it themselves, right? It's you guys know EHR
we know
systems.
Everybody knows what you're talking cheap, about,
right? Right, but they're hosting their own, and one of the things that they say is, look, we have an SLA that we have to keep all these environments up to a certain patch level within Microsoft for security and everything else, right? I mean, you're going to host, that's what you do. How do we know our app works after we run this update? Right? We're hosting one app for these people. It had better work. Wait a minute. Not just work. How do we know that it launches and opens in the same amount of time or goes from record to record or whatever it is? And they do it manually.
Yeah.
They have people touch these apps, right? this organization is not small. They need tooling for it, right? And that's what we're seeing with customers. That's why I think when you look at customers, even mid-sized customers that are moving to Azure or AWS or something, if they are savvy enough to move to that, they're going to start asking the app questions too, because now they've outsourced their infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, what do I do with these IT dollars that I have? I still have holes in my performance, or I have holes in, the number of tickets I'm getting from app failures. How do I solve them? They're going to start looking for this type of instrumentation.
Mm-hmm. I think we're coming to that head too, where all of the, like you said, all of the issues that have historically been the problem child that everyone forced their effort on, those have mostly been solved. Now we're at the applications, we're at the thing, like I always say, a computer's awesome, right? Unless you don't have any applications, and then the idea of a computer's awesome, the computer itself's not awesome.
Yeah, we are. It's so funny that you said that. We are at the hardest point of this whole thing, right? If you think about the original days of server-based computing, they were making a connection via ICA to, an NT351 server, or we can go back to WinView if we want, right? Nothing worked, right? You could barely get printing to work. You could, Office didn't work unless you put the machine in install mode and you put a script on there. And now we're all the way forward. And to me, it's like, man, I used to solve those printing, even though there were print solutions like thin print or Uniprint, I used to solve those printing problems with Notepad and an INF file. I could build a pretty cool product if it's as easy as that. Then you start moving. And think about it. You said, application layering was the thing, right? 5-7 years ago, huge hump. It just the problems kept getting tougher to solve. If you're an entrepreneur in the early days of EUC, you pick the easiest targets. We're in the late days of EUC now. Now it's about applications.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think EUC by its very nature, just kind of going back to that, is now evolving again, right? It evolved the first time when there was a divergence of endpoint management system administrators that were looking after physical, and then there became an entire subculture that we're all part of, where it was around VDI and
it was like server side EUC, yeah,
right. It became a thing. And now with Microsoft, with Scott, with Michael Wallant, that whole endpoint management team, that convergence is coming back together. I mean, they separated in maybe 2005-06, and now it's all coming back together, because guess what? You're going to deliver Windows 365, which is in essence a cloud PC using a cloud management plane in Intune. You're going to do the same thing with, Nerdio running AVD or getting cloud VDI, but it's coming from the same place. And I think you're going to start seeing those skill sets and that market start to converge again, where endpoint management and virtualization are going to be one and the same skill set within the next, 5-7 years.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. That's it. I don't think I've unpacked that enough yet, but that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, Samit, what were you seeing at VMware Explore? Obviously, you were on stage, you had all these big discussions, were there for the variety of meetings. What was the conversation that was happening throughout that time?
It's interesting because the idea of apps on demand, not app volumes has been there for ages, right? But the idea of apps on demand with the VMware team, to compete ultimately really was, a core group of really smart individuals on the business development side that actually engaged us, right? So, you've got Chris Wintenberg, and you've got, Terry Vaughn and Skip Gumbel's whole team. And then you've got the product side, and you had Ron from the office of the CTO, you had Jeff. But this idea was about 18 months ago that they started announcing it. And it would just be whispers, and it'd be whispers at every single show, whether it was Munich iGel Disrupt, or whether it was Nashville, or whether it was Barcelona of last year. This is the first year after 18 months that when they actually talked about it, because part of the hard parts of all these trade shows, especially for a startup, is we've invested everything that we have like into apps on demand being a core go-to-market strategy for us. And people are like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. This was the first show, Sage, where people were walking from the session, following us directly to our booth. Jeff did half the demos. I did half the demo. So you had VMware demoing us. We had us demoing us. And it's the first time you're starting to see people say, I have this problem. I don't want to package my app differently for, they call it MECM, which for a minute I'm like, what is that? So, and it's Microsoft Endpoint Manager, Configuration Manager, right? I'm like, people call it Config Man or Intune. Nobody calls it MECM, right?
MECM.
So one of the things that people were saying is, I'm packaging separate for Endpoint Manager, and I'm packaging again for delivery on the horizon. And when they started kind of seeing this, this was the first show where they're like, how do we get a proof of concept now, as opposed to, wow, this sounds like a great idea. I'm going to start thinking about my budgetary planning for 2 years from now. That's gone. It's the time is now.
We're have the problem now.
Now. And the tech, like App Volumes is there. App Volumes is there. We're there, right? Like, if
and I mean, the nice thing for you guys, I would say, is that, you know, this is just, you know, being really, I mean, it's been out for a little bit, but they're really just now really talking about it hugely publicly. The nice thing, in addition, is that it is a boatload of new features, right? If it was the same old App Volumes, but they fixed a few things, no. And your name right there next to them with a boatload of new features, they're going to, customers are going to be going, well, wait a minute, what was that product when we were demoing this? Let's pull that over. Let's take a look at that. Yeah, it's a good position to be in.
It's a great position because, again, our goal, Ron, is to meet the customer where they are. So if they want to use MSIX, use MSIX. If you want to use local install, use local install. If you want to use app walls, use it. We'll help you determine what the right solution for the right users, or use a heterogeneous mixture of all of those, because sometimes that's the right thing. So, you know, for us, being able to be in that position to say, you're ready to start your digital transformation. It only took 4 years, but here we are. You know, we're ready with you on that journey, to embark on that journey with the planning. It's cool. It was exciting, actually. It was energizing, as much as I complain about Vegas. It was the right combination of nerds and hiatus from Vegas that I've had that made it really great.
I think it's a lot of fun stuff that's happening and that's been pent up. And I feel like the change of location really helped a lot of people realize this is it. This is the time. It's not business as usual. It's time to let's get down and get in the weeds and
did anyone hear the attendance number? I didn't hear the attendance number.
I believe the projected number was slightly above 10K. Whether or not that is the real number, I'm not sure, right? But I think the idea was that it was going to be bigger than the San Francisco show last year, which I didn't happen to attend because San Francisco is such a near and dear place to my heart, and seeing it in its current state is not okay with me.
I always used to stay at the Hilton Union Square. I can't even stay there anymore. It's terrible.
It's a shame. It really is a shame, because it's such a great city.
Last time I went was 2008, and I loved it, and I have not been back since, and I don't know if I will be back.
Keep that memory for a little while. Let them clean this up. Like, I saw this movie. It was called Demolition Man. They just merged like L.A. and San Francisco. You know, eventually they'll clean it up. Don't worry.
You know what's funny? Like, I know we're getting off topic and we're running a little low on time, but there are a bunch of entrepreneurs and Silicon Valley startup folks that are looking to build their own city. So it was in the Times. It was in the New York Times today, or maybe it was yesterday. But they've actually started getting a group together to disassociate themselves from traditional Silicon Valley and find and buy up massive plots of land so that they can actually build Silicon Valley the way that Silicon Valley was meant to be built.
Interesting.
Whether or not that turns into a thing, I mean, it's kind of what Ron's talking about. We're not going to mash and get Wesley Snipes doing 187 on Sylvester Stallone, where he can only, his superpower was knitting, if you remember. Ron.
That's right. That's right. I'm sorry. That whole movie was just a play on Brave New World, but what do I know?
A little Aldous Huxley love right there. Exactly right. Awesome. But yeah, we'll see where that goes. But I know we're out of time, but I wanted to take the time and thank you, Ron. This has been actually one of the most enlightening podcasts, and I know that the hype in my mind, it definitely lived up to it, just because of the fact that I knew it was going to be about apps, and then it was going to be about everything else, which is a little history, why you chose small versus big. And I hope,
it's the all the things part.
It's the all the, that's right. It's the all the things. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's been fun. It's been fun, guys.
Perfect. Well, hopefully our partnership's going to continue growing. So I know, Ron, we'll be spending a heck of a lot more time together. But hopefully we can do some more different series, kind of like the podcast, but just kind of see where that goes. But thank you for the time. And Sage, as always, just a gloriously smooth moderator with the dulcet tone. And I think that this was a great session, and I'm looking forward to catching up with you guys soon.
Awesome. Rimo3 offers automated pre-deployment testing of Windows applications, OS updates, and security patches. Use unattended automation to test and assess application readiness for Windows 10, Windows 11, Windows 365, Azure Virtual Desktop, as well as identifying MSIX and multi-session suitability. Your apps, your workspace, our priority.